Julie is on the phone with Joe. We'll figure this out along the way. Thank you all so much for your patience. We do apologize, but as I mentioned earlier, we're all kind of used to this. Technology doesn't always work, especially with everything going around, and it's just every time I think this is as bad as it can get, something else, like look outside, it's like we're on Mars today, so you know, always something new. So, but anyways, welcome. I'm Yvonne Schwab, ACG Silicon Valley CEO. As many of you already know, ACGSV is the leading business-to-business networking organization in Silicon Valley for senior executives, providing connections, thought leadership, and enabling personal and organizational growth. ACGSV offers an array of networking opportunities. With almost 15,000 members in 59 chapters across the world, ACG provides local connections with a global reach. Now, we have a variety of virtual events in the coming months. We invite you to visit our website at acgsv.org to see the full calendar, including several fun networking events with other ACG chapters, and my favorite, I'm super excited about this, a virtual wine tasting. If you're at all interested in the wine tasting, sign up, because you have to sign up by tomorrow because the wine has to be shipped to you. So this will be with the Madrigal Family Winery of Calistoga, and we hope to see you. If you have any questions regarding ACGSV, I'm happy to have a one-on-one with you, discuss your possible involvement with our chapter. And I hope we're ready, and I'm excited to offer you today's event, which would not have been possible without our sponsor, RSM, a multinational network of accounting firms, forming the 6th largest accountancy professional services network in the world by revenue. Thank you, RSM. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Joe, hopefully. He's a partner at RSM, and Joe leads the security, privacy, and risk consulting practice in the firm's Western markets and specializes in security, privacy, and third-party reporting. So Julie, do we have Joe? No. Okay.
Yes, we do. We just need to add him back as a panelist.
Okay. So few more seconds. Hopefully that will work. And then we get started. Again, I appreciate everybody's patience this morning.
Hi, Carol. Can you please add Joe as a panelist?
Yes, I am searching for him now. Okay, he's been added.
There we go. Oh, wait.
You'll also need to unmute him. Thank you.
How about now?
Yes.
Oh,
We have you, Joe.
okay. Watch anything. I don't know if it's coming through which phone. I've got 3 phones going. All right. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for the multiple continuous technical difficulties. I don't know why I decided to do it on this one. Good morning, everybody. I apologize for the odd lighting. It's like night in San Francisco. The sun just did not come up today. So normally we would have a big panel of open light behind me. Is pitch black out. I know we've cut into our time here, so I'll quickly introduce our panel. We're very fortunate to have a good, well-rounded panel for the discussion today. The raining ash on my rooftop and deck is just another in a long sequence of odd events this year that we're all working through together. that won't necessarily come up in our conversation, but we're very glad to have clients and friends join us for a panel to talk about a variety of issues that we've encountered this year. And I guess without further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves and speak on their own behalf for their companies. Why don't we start with you, Mark?
Thanks, Joe. Good morning. I'm Mark Ortung. I'm CEO of Nexient. We do outsourced product development. So we do user experience, product management, design, and engineering to develop products. And all of our people are in the US. So we're headquartered in the Bay Area, and all of our engineers are in Michigan and Ohio.
Thanks, Mark. How about on to you, Josh?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Josh Johnson, head of internal audit for Norton LifeLock. So consumer company focused on, I guess, what we are calling cyber safety. So identity, privacy, security, home and family, headquartered in Tempe, Arizona, but operations globally around the world.
Thanks, Josh. Kai, on to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Kai Westerwelle, I'm a partner at Bird & Bird in San Francisco office. We are a law firm, actually, but we are not a US law firm. We are an international law firm all over Europe, Asia Pacific, and Middle East. We have a small operations in the US, which is a representative office, as I said, and we are advising US clients mostly with everything they do outside of the US. So everything that's international, that's our job. And my specialization is privacy and data security.
Perfect, thanks. And Adam, to you, finally, to round it out.
Adam Mansour, head of sales engineering at Axero. We are a managed detection and response provider for cybersecurity. We've got, our main offices, or at least what used to be offices, in the Seattle area, in California, and Toronto, Canada as well. So just sort of spread out a little bit through the US and Canada.
Got it. Wherever you are, there is light. I feel like it's about 10 p.m. here. And for those of you who don't know, I don't know if you can see the black windows behind me. I live right in the middle of San Francisco on the intersection of Haight and Ashbury. Everyone's reaction out on the streets today is a little bizarre because it's an odd morning, to be sure. So if I go on mute, I'll definitely not try to mess with those settings again. We'll want to kind of walk through a few structured questions, but want this to be as interactive a session as possible. I've had the chance to connect with all of you, and it has been certainly a long and bizarre year. I want to just kind of make a few observations across the technology industry, a focus industry for us, and certainly we're very glad and honored to have this distinguished panel join us. And we want to first go into just a little bit of discussion about the environment that we're in. We are in September, of course. We've been dealing with a lot of work from home situations and a lot of interlacing issues that have affected a great many of our clients, both large and small. First, I thought I would target Josh to talk about what is the current state. I know your company is, by all accounts, a more typical tech company with distributed teams of people across multiple locations and campuses. Already gone through quite a bit of change in the last 18 months. This certainly adds to the top of them. What is your kind of report out for Norton LifeLock right now? How have your teams adapted to this mode of operation at this stage of the year?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, the concept of virtual teams isn't really new to us. Operations across the globe with major headquarters and our operations in Chennai and Dublin, obviously here in the U.S. So a lot of what we've done is getting used to different time zones and working virtually. So I think that hasn't been the type of change. So our current ops with respect to that have remained the same. A small portion of our business has to do with, not small, but relative to our workforce is customer support. So a bit of impact there, I think, when we think about that not being on site, that being remote, working through those challenges. So the change management there has been something we've been working through as current state. But as you mentioned, the bigger thing for us is, we divested half our business last November, right? So we sold our enterprise business November of last year. And so the last, 6, 8, 9 months have really been focused around business transformation to pure play consumer company from being half enterprise or B2B. So that process has really been a lot of the change. Selling our assets, our workforce has been reduced. We reduced our workforce from 11,000 to 2,500. So that change management is significant, as well as major changes in the executive suite, all while now doing that remote. So that's been sort of interesting, right? The executives and such, we usually go to different sites to be able to see the teams, and we can't do that anymore. So that's been a bit of a difference. And so a real focus probably for us right now has been culture, and how do we shape the culture of what our new company is, and doing it in a remote way. So that's sort of where we're at right now, is shaping the new culture of this company and doing it in the new environment also.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's hard to define a traditional or typical tech company, but in many respects, if you divorce, kind of the significant changes the company's gone through in the last year, you've got, a good combination of product development teams. You've got kind of a core, but data centers distributed across the globe. You kind of fit the mold of maybe a traditional tech, but Mark, maybe I would pivot it to you. You've got a more interesting operating model that you've had since the onset, and I'd be very interested to hear kind of the current state of your company and kind of what you've gone through on your own behalf, and of that the clients that you serve in the last year.
Yeah, there's been a number of interesting changes for us. So our model is normally remote teams who sit together. So we'll have a team of 5 to 10 people in Michigan or Ohio who are collaborating with each other. And we're almost always remote from the client. So from our client's perspective, it's actually a good model for this environment, and our demand has gone up. We're actually growing. For our teams though, they're all now at home. And so it's an interesting challenge. One of the challenges that we have is that the more junior folks benefit the most from being in that collaborative environment. We have people that have been doing development, product design and development for 15, 20 years. They're very happy to be productive at home, but the people who are in year 1 or year 2 of their career really benefit from learning from the guys sitting next to them. So it's an interesting challenge to reach out to them and really be proactive to communicate to those guys, to keep them engaged and make sure they don't get blocked throughout the day. So it's been really positive in terms of the way our business has grown, but it's been really challenging in terms of keeping our own team engaged, making sure everybody's able to be productive and keep growing and learning.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think we've gotten a lot of feedback that it's the younger generations just entering the workforce that are probably struggling with this circumstance more than anybody else. And I guess it makes sense, right? It's hard for me to remember. When I started my career, the first thing I was sent out to a client, and I pretty much, until March, never came home, except for to get new clothes and repack. But it's certainly a different world, and some of these themes have been occurring, but I find that interesting, and it's obviously very good that from a growth standpoint that's positively affecting you, and from a client transparency standpoint, it sounds like they're not necessarily noticing too big of a difference, which is, again, power of kind of one of the unique facets of this industry is the ability to adapt to this. And that's why I want to kind of focus on kind of the presence of culture. Adam, how about for you and your company? I know you have another slight spin on this, and I'd love to hear you.
Yeah, I mean, from internal, obviously, other than the executive team flying around and real estate assets, we don't leverage as much anymore. We're kind of a extra large security operations center is the way to kind of picture us. So, we had disaster recovery, which is now just, modus operandi, right? We are operating on a different footing, but in the same way, right? And we couldn't drop anything or stop monitoring just because there was a work from home policy. So there was a lot of collaboration software and cloud and everything else that we already kind of were leveraging for those exact reasons, for the day that something would happen, because it's sort of built into the company, a lot of risk management. And we were lucky, I think, to go through things like hardware refresh in November, and not have to do a lot of cross-border IT and shipping back and forth and sourcing of laptops. A lot of our customers are, had to go through, unfortunately, with supply chain hiccups here and there. I think the main conversations we're having with our customers now is that they're in a rush to go to places they didn't expect to be this fast, right? The cloud, BYOPC, in some cases to work with remote access when their entire call center moved over. You're an insurance company with 50,000 people, all of a sudden, you have from 1,000 concurrent VPN users to 30,000, and you don't have your ability to ship hardware very quick, and you've moved your whole call center to the house. You're obviously going to start calling your security company and be like, okay, well, we just set this thing up, check it out. Let's make sure we're monitoring. Can you monitor this? Can you monitor that? So they almost like redo all the vendor due diligence, redo all the security audit as fast as they can to implement new things because they have to.
Well, it's interesting, and I know in my conversation with Kai, really trying to get a sense for the clients that you represent and doing a lot of cross-border work. And, I thought our conversation was interesting, and maybe on, kind of behalf of your world and those clients and constituencies that you represent, what is your assessment of the current state from what you're seeing with your clients that are still trying to make positive progress in this environment?
Well, yeah, first of all, I mean, our experience is totally different than, the merely US experience, because we are around the globe and then we're facing like everything in waves. So we started facing it the first time when we had to close down China, which happened immediately after it came up, right? And then it went down to Europe, all over Europe, and we have office in Italy. You can imagine we had to close them down from one day to next, and all over Europe. And then the US, a representative office, but now, interesting enough, the wave is just turning down. Like China was the first to reopen many weeks ago already, and Singapore and Australia, they're all back to work, and Europe as well. I mean, Italy faced the worst time, but they are back in the office already. So we are following the waves and trying to, two things actually, getting people back in the office if possible, and also making sure, that we can provide the services, which was, as Adam said, I mean, it was an interesting experience to change from coming together to a virtual environment from one day to next. Fortunately, we all have our devices, so it was easier than we thought, but still it's a big challenge. And that was the one thing. But from the client perspective, interesting enough, I think we, same as Mark, I think we didn't have a decrease in clients' requests. It's more of an increase actually, but it's shifted like from the M&A work and the finance work to more like cybersecurity, privacy work, and in particular, of course, employment. I mean, employment is a big topic when it comes to a pandemic like this. People asking for flexibility in the different countries, and not every country is as easy when it comes to employment flexibility than the US example given, like Germany, France, Italy. They're all totally different, or Singapore. So that's a shift of the work and the requests we got from client over the last weeks, but last month actually. And in one thing, Mark, I really subscribe to that. It's much more difficult for juniors to catch up with how to do their work. And particularly we in summer, all over Europe, you have the summer associates, and they come and they start working from home. That's not a perfect situation, honestly speaking. But from this, I mean, we learned a lot from the crisis, and we think indeed our teams actually have been brought closer together. Whereas it was more like a local work before, not local, but it was of course local teams. We now work in international teams, and whenever I have a call or like this video conference, I can involve everybody from everywhere, which is great because you have the specialists on board and the clients, they are just used to it now and they like it. So that's a little benefit of this awful crisis that we are facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've long said, is this in some cases has kind of forced some companies' hands culturally. I mean, I know we installed, telepresence, video conferencing facilities in all of our offices, probably en masse about a decade ago, and many of them sat unused for most of the time, just because the natural flow of culture and collaboration of our firm in serving our clients has been that we do some phone telephonic work, but we also then immediately fly out or drive over to our clients in almost every case. And I think from a a culture and collaboration standpoint, I'm really interested to hear, particularly this panel's view, because we've heard from Facebook, we've heard from the very large tech companies, we've heard from the disproportionately affected smaller tech companies that are, or even companies of all industries that are, kind of disproportionately affected by this circumstance. Maybe Mark, we'll start with you, because you definitely, you definitely have one of the most interesting models and circumstances, but you certainly live and die based on the collaboration of your teams with your client teams. You mentioned the impact on junior staff, and that's kind of an internal issue. You mentioned that, from a client standpoint, it's been fairly transparent in as much as you were doing this work remotely anyway. But what are you seeing from a long-term perspective, from your view about, return to work, return to the office, the impact that you see in the space in general, given that most of our tech, colleagues work on product development and collaboration, many not having maybe the more progressive stance that you do. What do you see, if you look out over the next 3 years, about the impact, or what is tech as an industry going to really land on to kind of resume normal operations, so to speak?
Yeah, so one thing that is a big part of our culture in our software work normally, and not necessarily everywhere, is delivering every week or delivering every 2 weeks, right? So we have this very agile, nimble approach to building software. We've now applied that to everything we do, because we feel like the one thing that's consistent is we don't know what's going to happen in a month or 2 months or 3 months. So as an example, we bought a building in January, which is interesting timing to buy a building. We bought a 110,000 square foot delivery center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so we were, working through how to build this out, how to design it. We made some obvious changes, like you can now go into the bathroom, that we put sort of these tow hooks on the door, so you can open the door without touching it. You can go into the bathroom, you can wash your hands, you can dry your hands, you don't have to touch anything, right? So there's things like that. But then we got into even further, like what we used to think of as really important were a lot of huddle rooms where people could meet one-on-one with somebody. And when you start looking at social distancing, most of the rooms that we had planned to build would only fit one person, or maybe a room we thought could fit 8 people could now fit 2, possibly 3. So we actually did not build out a lot of the conference rooms. We left it as sort of vast open spaces, and we have these movable walls. So as people come back to the office, we can create larger spaces where people can stand further apart. But again, and we like the idea of the movable walls because it's not so much of a commitment to what's going to happen. And I think that's the underlying principle is for us, is with everything we do, we're trying to maintain flexibility, and we're trying to maintain the ability to sort of see how things change. My hope is a year from now, we're back in the office and it's back somewhat like it was before, but I don't know if that'll be the case. So we're sort of leaving our options open and changing them as we go. With everything.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question, real estate. I've got a lot of tech companies, very large and very small, that, we're in the midst of kind of thinking about their real estate footprint. As you know, the valley is quite congested. The city of Mountain View is, quote unquote, I was on a call with them yesterday. They have, had it with the amount of congestion there, and I think, and you look forward a decade, again, some of the biggest companies in the space absorb a tremendous amount of square footage in commercial real estate. Josh, maybe I'll pivot it to you, because you are already going through somewhat of a real estate consolidation because of the divestiture more so than this. But when you kind of look out, not that you're in the real estate planning department, but from your view, I'm sure you'll have a certain input to this. What do you see as the future for your kind of company's position on the necessity for in-person collaboration, particularly for product development forward? Plans like you have, versus kind of just the everyday company angle.
Yeah, so different from Mark in the fact that we were looking to sell probably our largest assets from a physical campus location. That notably our largest campus there, the Semantic campus in Mountain View, rather than purchasing something. But that also applies to some co-location data centers that we owned, and quite frankly, offices we have in LA, Dublin, et cetera. We're trying to get rid of those, sort of from a stranded cost standpoint. I guess quickly on that end, as you can imagine, people who wanted to buy those or were interested in buying those, and what we would have thought would have been really desirable locations. Our campus there in Mountain View is right next to Google's campus, right? So it's like, a natural fit, right? But, Google then makes the decision that they're going to not go back to the office until July of next year or whatever it is, or never. And so now that's sort of, where we're at is what is our go forward strategy from a collaboration standpoint? Does it make more sense from a balance sheet standpoint, or even from a P&L standpoint, not to have those big leases, or to get more flexibility in what that looks like, and make it so that it's not mandatory for anybody to return from work. I think those are the discussions that we're looking at right now. I think it'll be interesting to see how we measure productivity as a company with the way that it's been going for the last 7 months, and is there true impacts to productivity for the remote working? What does that do for the company's culture on a go forward basis? So I think, as with a lot of these things, we're not going to be the first one to make the decision, right? We'll probably be more fast following than anything. But yeah, it's a big unknown for us, right? I think we make commitments now that are 4 to 6 months out, and then continue to see what happens both in the industry and then in the sort of the more macro level globally.
Right. I think that's one of the most interesting contextual realities of the circumstance. I think, as you mentioned, some of the, the larger companies, which presumably will lead the way in terms of setting the narrative, some have made very vague statements. I think one of them said up to 50% of our workforce might be permanently remote by, I think it was 2040. I remember it was like an unusually long period of time, like 20 years into the future. And it was non-committal. It was up to, right? Up to means it could be 5%. Meaning, we're going to be flexible to it, but I think, kind of the underpinnings in dealing with a company, maybe not in such the public sphere, is that the idea is that they really don't love the idea of having up to 50% of their particular product teams working full-time remote by any point in time. Like, in other words, it's not something that's, look forward to with a great deal of enthusiasm. Certainly, the real estate impact, even on our own business, is kind of looking, what do we have to do and reconfigure? Certainly large companies might have more resources to do that, notwithstanding space limitations, than maybe a middle market company that, maybe in a long-term commitment and now has to kind of figure out how to navigate the future for it. Maybe Adam, maybe you'd like to kind of hear your perspective, because again, we've got kind of the bifurcation between the very large and very small clients. You probably see the median range, both in the clients that you work with and serve, as well as your own companies. See about kind of the perceived reality or impetus for the need for in-person collaboration. Again, for that product-facing environment most exclusively, not so much the back office stuff, which presumably could be done from wherever at any point in time.
Yeah,
Adam, we can go to you first.
Sure. I mean, in terms of sophistication, I think that's what you're looking at. As an IT department, you talk about, a data center, classic network skills, classic, server skills and things like that. They may not be ready for infrastructure as a service, to divest and go to a utility model. We were going in hypergrowth mode, after our last raise. We tripled in size over the last 6 months as a small to medium company, ourselves. When we started, bounding over, compute complexity and things like that, we had to go immediately to our larger suppliers, the cloud. And, we were dealing with issues where we started to divest already from the data center investments. I think for small to medium customers, unfortunately, their IT admin is likely not ready to immediately jump into infrastructure as a service, start divesting of data centers, start moving into VDI or things like that, removing VPN and going to sort of zero trust cloud brokers or any of these more sophisticated tools that are kind of, I'd say the pandemic kind of exacerbated that trend, right? Everybody was just sort of moving towards that anyway. But you also see a much more draconian thing going on. Real estate assets aren't the only thing people are trying to write off. You also look at, vendor due diligence and what's on the books. People used to have very basic financial statements they'd collect from smaller vendors that they used to partner with to get software like customer relationship management or something. And if they were particularly prone to the pandemic in terms of a downturn, like people in hospitality and tourism, you have people that it was sort of a feast or famine, right? Some of our customers were got the hand sanitizer contract and they were 24/7 overnight and breaking the doors off in terms of hiring people. And then you had other people that were in hotels, right, who literally had repurposed them into sort of like hospitals in some cases. So you see kind of this feast or famine thing, and that really forces you to kind of build agility into your contracts. We were already, because of the hyper growth mode, looking for flexible real estate where we already had the space out. It was kind of on whoever it was, we work in whatever city to scaffold us up temporarily. And you kind of see, rightfully so, I think, a hollowing out of the city, and that changes your sourcing of employees, and it also changes the due diligence I think you have on vendors and suppliers to really look at the financial statements and say, okay, are you really amortizing 5 years of a massive real estate investment as a small company if you're a provider? Are you unfortunately too much of not enough of a mixed bag as a supplier? And those kinds of questions are pretty seem cruel kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to get into a relationship with a small to medium provider because they might actually go broke during this. But it's a very real part of the CIO's consideration when they're looking at small to medium companies. Isn't just security practices and the fact that they've had a profitable last 2 years. It's what do the next couple of years look like? What's going to be on your books? Are you still going to be here? Is much more of a salient question now when interviewing suppliers. And a lot of people have had to renegotiate suppliers. You have so many different contracts you've had to redo in the pandemic for software because the vendor you had wasn't ready for for something like this. So I think that it's definitely time to reevaluate everything you had in budget in 2019 and look at a much more different due diligence process for 2020 for your suppliers.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, I think when I often think back now, if the timing would have been different for a company like WeWork, this whole world could have been very different for us, this posture, and for them, right? If the timing would have been reversed, because I think that's right. The idea for flexible workspace, even now is the time to really double down on that as a concept, because I think, to a certain degree, there's a continued uncertainty about the degree to which everything will return back to quote unquote normal, or maybe never. Did it need to, right? Some of the back office operations, quite honestly, some of these things could have been, migrated to this environment fairly rapidly, fairly successfully. It's just that nobody knew there would absolutely be a mandatory requirement all of a sudden in March. Whereas for other things, when we kind of look to, and Kaya, this is where I want to pivot to you for a minute, because I think one of the most interesting aspects of our conversation, and as I deal with you and others who work in the privacy space, working on collaborative enterprise product, doing assessments, everything from product development, the concept of maintaining privacy for purposes of data sharing. And this happens everything from due diligence, from acquisitions of companies, which we play a large role in that for our private equity clients, to just doing routine assessments related to security and privacy. Even the conduct of those activities. Now, while we're doing all of this remotely, there is the question of, well, how exactly are you viewing this information? How are you viewing that network diagram? What are we sharing, on a quote open channel? How can we be sure that it isn't captured? There are certain times where we would go to a client and look at certain things in person only, just for the purposes of being able to confirm that it exists, not to take a copy, not to have it sent in any way. Certainly, those things got taken off the table for us, for every security company working through these issues. From a privacy perspective, what are some of the challenges that you advise clients working in this space, and what do you see as a long-term prospect for those more fringe issues where the actual sharing of data and intellectual property is key to a transaction or an evaluation, but at the same time maybe can't or won't be done in mass, in person, for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, well, from the privacy perspective, I think there is actually not too much of a change when it comes to supplier stuff, when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to audits and everything. You indicate that, traditionally we're flying over and have audits like from European companies to US suppliers, but that didn't happen in the past either. So there wasn't really a change here. What we see, of course, is a lot of interest in these topics, like in the modern communication topics that we're talking about, like the Zoom call we're just having, right? That's, of course, a big topic, like not only the Zooms, but, you're now discussing things online, which you never did discuss online before. So it's a big challenge, I think, or at least something that you have to audit very carefully. What kind of modern communication tools are you allowed to use, even though you had to use it from one day to next? That was the surprise. Usually when you think of implementing new products and you're thinking of a cybersecurity or privacy, you have a process that's going on. It's a project plan for a couple of months or even years, and then you plan everything correctly, and then you're safe. Maybe you even mirror your thoughts with the authorities, which you couldn't do in this case, right? You were forced to new technologies that you have never possibly not used before. And I can tell you from our perspective, of course we did video conferencing before, but of course not every day 10 hours something. So you have like 4 providers now, and we ourselves had to do the due diligence for all of them, what is considered safe from a privacy professional perspective. That's the one thing. I think from a privacy perspective and seeing where we are, and in particular the waves that we see back to work ideas, I think that's the most important thing here that we see a lot is the question of COVID-19 and what am I allowed to ask? It's more of a privacy employment topic that we see all over the world right now, because of course, if your employees are coming back to the office, you want to ask them, are you ill? Is somebody of your family ill? Do you have contracted COVID or something? That might be okay in the US, but it's definitely not okay in the EU. And that's the biggest issue we're facing all over the world right now with our clients. Mostly they're asking, hey, what am I allowed to ask my employees, right? In order not to invade their privacy. And that's a big deal here and very complicated. And it's getting even worse. Think about visitors coming into your office and you have this scanners, thermometer scanners. That might be okay at the airport, but it's definitely not legal in Europe. So how can you ask somebody, can I take your temperature? And all these things have to be figured out if we're thinking about back to the office, which is hopefully the next step we're thinking about right now. It's not so much, working from home, or the other question is, can you ask somebody to stay home? Right? That's also very difficult. And you saw the teachers' discussions in the US. There's a lot of discussion going over in Europe and in Asia. Can employees ask to still work from home, even though we have a policy going back to work? And that again comes into privacy, because I might not be allowed to ask them why they want to work from home. That's a privacy, that's a health data. And all these health data are very important to structure the back to work ideas, which I'm not allowed to do that. So that's a big topic right now, health information with the COVID idea. But one thing I can say for all the audience here and you guys, interesting enough, for the first time, and I'm doing privacy for 37 years already, for the first time, the authorities all over Europe, which are usually very strict, they were very lenient on all these topics. They understood that fighting COVID-19 is the first that we have to do here, and maybe we take back privacy a little bit. So that's something, and you found these statements all over Europe, so you might have a little bit more room to maneuver on these privacy topics when it comes to audits. Same thing, they don't expect you to audit right now because you cannot just fly there, right? You're better off in asking some questions to employees that you might not ask usually. And all these things help, at least from a privacy perspective, to be a bit more liberal on that part in order to get back to the offices.
Right, yeah, and that brings up an interesting point, because I think literally today, I haven't even read the details yet. A, I got invited to some health and safety committee for our local practice. And B, I think they sat, what is it, the 16th? What day is the 16th? Oh wait, that's October. Actually 1 week from today, we'll be allowing on, with some structured methodology and process and requirements to, on an appointment basis, come back to our own office and work only in the offices that close. there's going to be a lot of staged activities to do that. And I think many would ask, well, what's to be gained? Because I think from we serve as a firm a variety of industries. I focus on tech. We focus on a lot of tech in the Bay Area, but we also see a lot of other industries and other clients. And I think one of the large ironies of all of this is that our clients most adept and able to pivot to this environment are also the ones that are least expressing an interest in remaining this way. I work with a lot of consumer products and manufacturing clients that they really struggled with the technological component of kind of shifting to this model very quickly. But now that they have, they're really evaluating like, oh, this is good, and this is kind of coming back. We want to restructure how employment works, from how many people come to which offices and on what frequency. That sounds like there's a kind of a consensus that is going to be the staged approach to this. But from a cultural standpoint, it seems to me, and this is where I kind of open it to you, to be challenged in the tech space the most, mostly because of the idea that that people tend to work together better in person. There's maybe more accountability, perceived or real, in that environment. And I think to Josh's earlier point, how to measure productivity. Certainly, we've seen studies come out that demonstrate both sides of this argument. About good collaboration, and physical presence isn't a key to it, but others suggesting that will wear off over time. Others would suggest that bringing in new generations of tech talent will be almost impossible if we don't buck that trend sooner rather than later, because we've got a whole generation kind of starting in the coming months. But from a concern standpoint, the issue of cybersecurity and just kind of the effectiveness of how companies have adapted. And I know, Adam, in particular, you've kind of direct visibilities to what companies across many industries, tech and others, are doing and going through from an operational and technical perspective. You talked a little bit about timelines. Again, we'll be in October soon, when a lot of companies kind of plan their depending on their fiscal cycle, their budgets and plans for 2021, which is hard to imagine. How would you, if you had to give a grade or an assessment for how companies have reacted and addressed those technical components? I know you helped them in some cases. And how do you see that going on into the next year?
I think certainly, from a people that were winning are going to continue to win, and that's unfortunately the sort of the equalizer for a lot of the budgets that were here. The lion's share of investments now are going to cloud vendors that were winning. You see it all over the news that suppliers like Amazon and suppliers like Microsoft are doing extraordinarily well in the pandemic. The ability to work with logistics companies and other cloud-enabled companies that are just ready for these things are typically where the mind share is and where the wallet share is. But that comes with a sacrifice, right? There are obviously a lot of budgets that are going to be under strain. Most people cutting things like marketing automation budgets and things like that. In cybersecurity, typically your budget was around 6% of the overall IT spend. That's typically what a CIO would sort of allocate for stuff like this. And kind of to Kai's point earlier, you used to be able to do certain things like put physical security safeguards like video cameras and biometric locks on your door, and now everybody's accessing stuff from home. So where's your physical perimeter, right? And how are you prioritizing the investments that are made against the risks, right? You see a 4,000% increase in ransomware because, again, BYOPC, these machines were already infected and now they're just getting connected to corporate networks with older technology. So you see people prioritizing, sort of this zero trust cloud, the major vendors first, the collaboration, the file management, all that other stuff that goes into making their business cloud enabled. And then the kinds of things, the kind of tools that they need to use secure that environment and not their data center anymore. Tools like firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, network detection and response. These systems are unfortunately built for the data center and not the cloud, right? Where those networks and those connectivity points aren't the same. And so you see those vendors, likely going to be losing over the next year or two, and the lion's share of money going to places that were sort of edge case, right? Niche, CASBs, other cloud-enabled firewalls and brokers of that nature. A lot more cloud-enabled endpoint stuff. So your traditional antivirus vendor was already in trouble with guys like Cylance and CrowdStrike on their heels, and now no disrespect to a semantic, Josh, but if you end up with somebody who's just not got the cloud story figured out, they're going to doubly lose because they're not going to have that mind share. You can't continue to use them. So it's especially rational, I think, at this point to go back and redo vendor due diligence with a cloud first mentality, and to look at how the investments that you've already had to make are now going to be protected through 2020, and build a lot more agility into contracts. And CIOs preferring to actually pay a premium in many cases for monthly service fees, no contract, for SaaS providers, as opposed to dealing on a 1 or 2 year amort for a contract with another vendor, right? And you have more advanced cloud technology providers like Amazon and Microsoft are ready to do it based on compute that kind of flex up and flex down that utility model for spending. A lot of people looking at if there's ways to do that with voice. Is there a way to do that with BYOPC? Is there amort schedules I can get from a supplier on laptops? Because I may not want to be issuing laptops. I may have to furlough. I maybe want the supplier to collect it up because that's a big part of shipping it across. There's all kinds of ways that not just IT security tools, but IT in general goes through a refactoring of its buying criteria and a prioritization, right?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up an interesting point. Is I talked to a client yesterday, and again, I was knocking on wood so much because we were just at the end of a long weekend, and they had recounted at the end of the last 3-day weekend, which was Memorial Day, they fell subject to, as many have, a ransomware attack. And, as we collect data from companies of all size, clients and non-clients alike, you kind of see an uptick around holiday events simply because it's safe to assume that certain surveillance is going on at any given point in time. And then people look for the right time to strike once they've collected the credentials or the resources that they need and want to take advantage of. And of course, we're having this conversation after Labor Day. And I'm like, we should have done it last Friday. I'm just superstitious because I think we will see a new wave of clients, seeing events that have occurred over the last 5 to 6 days. And this pivots from kind of the corporate to the personal. So Josh, to you, I'll direct, obviously a company that's, designed around personal security and, the consequences of activities at the individual level, which I think, have only been exacerbated by, the circumstances. So many people now doing everything remotely. What is your biggest prediction for 2021, and what's going to dominate the discussions for companies and people as personnel of these companies going forward in this environment?
Yeah, so for us, I guess on the consumer side, we were fortunate to see, a huge uptick, right? Like more people working from home, like our consumer products, more people online, kids, so I think we saw an uptick, right? And on that front, I think it's hard for us to theorize what that'll be in the long run, because a lot of that has to do with, what does everybody do at a company level in terms of return to work, return to school. So there's, a big TBD, I think, from the operational side or the business side for us. Internally, I think what's interesting is, Adam talked about it a little bit on the risk profile. COVID happens, the pandemic happened so quickly that I think that although a lot of response activity happened, a lot of risk acceptance was just there, whether that was internally or on the vendor side, right? Like we outsource a lot of 80% of our call centers outsourced. Those businesses weren't set up to work from home, right? And there's geographic implications from a privacy standpoint that Kai talked about as well, the employment side. And so for us, it's sort of, what is the long-term play for companies? What's the new normal? Does it return to the way that it was? And what does that mean for the risk profile for those companies? Do they continue to invest sort of like we did? It's like, well, it pushed us quicker into things like IVR, where we're not collecting the data that we would have collected before. Those investments were sort of made and are continuing to be made, but I don't know, is that where we continue to make those investments? Because does it make sense with sort of the corresponding risk that we've accepted? So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out across industries, specifically tech for us. What's the risk appetite look like on a go forward basis with where the workforce really starts to sit long term?
Yeah, I think that brings up a great question. I think, Mark, I know we're running low on time. I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. But Mark, being in the world of kind of product development, are you seeing changes in the way people are kind of thinking about products and resources from a design perspective to accommodate maybe a future that's a little bit different? Are you starting to detect that now, or is it too early to tell?
No, we definitely are. There are a lot of our clients are moving much more aggressively toward trying to get all their business to e-commerce. We have a lot of retailers, right? And, before March, the really aggressive ones had maybe moved half to 2/3 online. And some of the laggards were down around 10-20%, and they're all trying to push everything up there. They're also trying to do a lot of, things like buy online, pick up in store. Again, the leaders had it. Not everybody had it. Now it's absolutely table stakes. So there's a lot of work being done very rapidly to get all retailers into that kind of a world. I think just with products in general, you're seeing people think about how to design differently as well. We used to do a lot of workshops with whiteboards and lots of Post-it notes where you could get the stakeholders to come in and really kind of get all their ideas out quickly and really work through that. We've now had to figure out how to do that with people scribbling on iPads, so we can all kind of scribble on the same virtual whiteboard and really have ideation sessions where everybody's sitting at home. It's harder to do, but we've been able to make it work. And another one, actually, we have a client where we needed to look at their operations around the world, and we were supposed to go to India to view some of their operations in March. And so when they put that project on hold, they've now decided that they can no longer put it on hold. So we're doing all the discovery work with crazy things like one of the people there puts on a GoPro and walks around in the facility so that our design team can effectively be there virtually, right? So, and you look at it and we're no longer going to spend 6 people all the way to the other side of the world. It's actually a much more efficient way to do this. And if the technology can make it happen, it's going to be pretty interesting.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So lots of things happening. People are getting creative, and what used to be required to be in person is no longer, and we're finding ways to get it done, and some of them are better.
Yeah, absolutely. As my grandmother always said, necessity is the mother of invention. I think we're at one of those critical juncture points right now, and I think we've got a topic for another panel if you'll join me. I think we could have an entire hour or even 2 on e-commerce, because the trends in that space are ridiculous right now, as well as some of the more operational priorities. Now, I know we're up against the half hour. Julie, team, let's see. We didn't really have a chance to go into any questions, but do we have any queued up? Can't see anything.
I don't see anything in the Q&A.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions. If the panel is still available and the audience wants to ask a question or two, maybe we can do that.
Absolutely, type them in. See where that is.
Sorry, may I just jump in while we're waiting for questions on the cultural thing? Because I think we have to distinguish between the US and Europe, and all the announcement that we see going back to work by 2021, 2022 is all like the big tech giants in the US. Mostly it's driven from this perspective, and in Europe we have a different perspective, and as well as in Asia somehow, because these people are already back to work. I think long-term changes only occur if you have a long-term topic. Whereas they were thinking like, now we're kind of over it, at least partly. It was 4 months. So the question will be, was these 4 months enough to change habits, to change culture? because people were mostly really asking to go back to work, to be in the social environment they loved. And working remote in Europe was not so common before that crisis. And at least what we see from the back to work perspective now in Asia and in Europe is that people indeed are hurrying back into the offices, even though we have them distant. And Adam, we have a wonderful plan. All of our floors are with colors, and where you have to stand, even the elevators, separate the corners and all these things. But that's what it is, but because people want to go back. So I'm questioning, I don't know whether it will happen. Will the change be that intense that it might be in Silicon Valley elsewhere? And I doubt about it, because most companies in Europe, traditional factory, they cannot change habits. They cannot work from home. And this only applies to tech companies. So I think the change that we might see might not that drastic as we might see it from here, from this specific environment in Silicon Valley. That's at least my perspective on that.
Well, and that's kind of another topic, is kind of the propensity for everyone culturally across all industries, but we'll talk about tech specifically, to kind of entrench with some of these realities. Because to be honest, the necessity has created the opportunity to create certain things that quite honestly are more efficient. I think, Mark, you brought up, how many times do we fly people everywhere for every little thing? I mean, it's simply not needed. I think we've known that for some time. Sure, there's a degree of balance associated with this, and I think we'll get back to a balance, but I think that balance point will be at a different place, but it'll just be interesting to see. Right now, we're dealing with just a wave of people who are just sick, including myself, of working from home and want to go somewhere just for the sake of going where. And there'll be a lurch back in that direction, but I think it'll settle at a more reasonable place. And I think, that'll be interesting to kind of take tune. And I'll be certainly paying attention in the tech industry, because again, we're here, and there's a lot of space and a lot of plans that are kind of being changed and disrupted right now. So I very much want to express my appreciation to the panel again. Fantastic insight. And by all means, I see some questions come up, but we'll circle back. I'll turn it back over to Julie and Yvonne.
Always forget to unmute. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciated the great input on the current and future scenarios. I think my favorite line of today is when Josh said prognosis for 2021 is a big TBD. And I think that's really where we're at. And so thank you to all the panelists for taking the time. Thank you for all the attendees to join us today, and I hopefully will see you again soon. Check out all the events of ACGSV, and we'll see you at another time.
Next time. Thanks all.
Stay
Have a good
safe.
morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.